Okay, good afternoon. Namaste. Uh, we are now on Sutra 24. In the last Sutra, Patanjali had talked about Īśvara Pranidhanatva. Now, in this Sutra, he gives us a definition of what Īśvara is. How do we define Īśvara? So he says, Klesha, Karma, Vikpak, Ashayi, Aparamushta, Purusha Vishesha, Ishvara. Ishvara is a distinction of self that is untouched by afflictions. Afflictions are the klesh, by actions, karma, their consequences, vipak, and by the subsequent deposits on the consciousness, ashay. Right? So he's saying that Ishvara is a state of being where these four do not touch you. And of course, when we take klesh as 5, it means these 8 do not touch you. We'll take Tavariaji Sahib's translation. This Ishvara is the soul, divine fragment, untouched by limitation, free from karma and desire. Right? Now let us try to understand. This will be a very, very interesting sutra, this one is. And actually for me also, after many years, I've had a look at this sutra. So Patanjali is saying, who is this Ishvara? And he doesn't call him just Ishvara. He says, Purusha Vishesha. Vishesh means special, separate. A Purush Vishesh, Ishvara. And this Ishvara is not smeared, untouched by, not smeared by klesh, karma, vipak, and ashay. Now, what are these 8 imperfections? The 5 kleshas, karma, vipak, and ashay. What are these 8 imperfections? At the time of creation, at the moment of creation, that absolute, that intelligence, which is the source of creation, we could call that as Purush also. That source of creation was not possible without these 8 imperfections. So when we are talking about these 8 imperfections, we have to go to that time out of which these five, that is the kleshas had to be there at the time of creation, Let us try to understand this. The inner Purush or the spirit is always free of these 8 imperfections, but the individual soul or Ishvara is bound by these 8 imperfections. Through conscious effort, which we call sadhana, through conscious effort, that Ishvara breaks free from these 8 imperfections and he reaches the state of Purush. At that time, he is called Purusha Vishesha Ishvara. The soul reaches to the same level as the spirit. Now, this word which he uses, Purush, see, it was a word which was in use right in the Vedic times when there was no Sanskrit grammar. And that word from the Vedic times has, gone through many different shades of meaning. And we'll take the real meaning little later on. But say in Vedic times, it meant the supreme self, In other systems like Sankhya, it meant consciousness or the pure conscious principle. Then in the times of the Upanishad times, it came as supreme self, etc. So in each of these different ages, different shades of meaning were added to this word Purusha. So in Sankhya, we say we have the cosmic principle of consciousness, which is untouched by anything. So if we were to just ask a lay question, what are the attributes that block our spiritual progress? Can we name them? And Patanjali names them as 8, the 5 kleshas: karma, vipak, and ashaya. These 5 kleshas from which he's aparabhusht, he's not touched by. So when you reach that state of Purusha Vishesha, you are not touched by the kleshas. Where there is no klesha, there is no karma or no vipak. Vipak is the law of cause and effect. Karma is the final thought or action which comes out of that law of cause and effect. We'll go into this, right? And that karma leaves a trace upon consciousness. It leaves a, what you call, pattern upon consciousness. And in that pattern is the, what you call, the basic seed of klesh to repeat. So, when we look at this, he's talking of the basic 8 things, which if we are free on, then the soul is free to merge into spirit. So at that state of Purush Vishesh, there is no karma, not good karma, bad karma, no karma. There is no vipak, so there is no law of cause and effect, right? That is, there is no fruition of the klesh into the karma, right? And because there is no reaction, there is no karma, there is no imprint left on the consciousness. And because there is no imprint left on the consciousness, there is no ashay in that state of Purusha Vishesha. Now here I'll just mention something. That supposing, we'll take it in another way, that every action we perform, whether it is in the form of a thought, whether it is in the form of a feeling, whether it is in the form of a sensation, it leaves a kind of score, it leaves a kind of imprint, it leaves a kind of pattern on the consciousness. The consciousness, which is the background of everything, it leaves a kind of imprint over there. Now, when we start entering into the state of self-consciousness, that is, the meaning of self-consciousness is that consciousness flows out as attention. We turn that attention back into consciousness. So consciousness looks upon itself. This is done through the process of self-remembering. So when you're holding your presence, you're throwing your consciousness back upon consciousness. You're giving the consciousness each moment a pattern of self-consciousness, of its own self. You're giving the consciousness an impression, an imprint of its own self. So it is, nothing is changing in that consciousness because every moment it is taking an imprint of itself through the process of self-remembering. Now, the minute there is no self-remembering, because the consciousness every moment has to take the pattern of the action, it takes the imprint of whatever karma is performed, thought, feeling, sensation. I don't know if I'm coming across on this. That is, we have something, say consciousness, and I have a thought, it leaves an imprint. I have a feeling, it leaves an imprint. I have a feeling of taking revenge, it leaves an imprint. And all those imprints gather together, they lie at some place, they have a resting place someplace, and that is called as ashay. Now, in this moment, if I'm self-conscious, giving myself the feeling of consciousness to consciousness, then consciousness will not take the feeling of the action which is being performed. It does not leave an imprint. It takes the imprint of itself. This is what we call as self-remembering, Atma Smaran. We are giving the Atma, the consciousness, the what do you call imprint of its own self. We are not allowing it to take the imprint of the action. And in that state, there is no karma, because unless that imprint comes in, that imprint wants to repeat, it goes into fruition, it creates a new karma, and the cycle repeats. Unless that happens, it is not possible, right? So that is why self-remembering, holding your presence is very important. Please start with 3-step rhythmic breathing and reach a state where you're able to hold the presence. The more you hold the presence, the consciousness will take the impression of itself, of the presence. Whatever actions we perform in life from morning to evening, we are giving the consciousness its own sanskar. We are not allowing it to take the sanskar of the action committed, of the, what do you call, karma committed. So vipak is the, once the klesh, and I'll use the word seed over here for klesha, right? But Patanjali in a later sutra has not used the word seed, he has used the word mool, meaning root. He calls klesh as the mool. So just take it as interchangeable. I've sort of been habituated to use the word seed, so I don't use the word root, but it is actually mool. So klesha is the original cause, and the original cause lies outside of time, because the original cause was needed, these 5 kleshas, at the time of creation. And vipak is the movement from the seed, that is the klesha, from the seed, which is the klesha, to the karma. Later on in a later sutra, we will see that the meaning of vipak is jati, ayu, bhoga, but that he is going to talk about in a later sutra. We are not taking that today, right? So this process of fruition, this process of cooking of the klesha into the karma, which is the karma is the thought, feeling, sensation. And because every thought and feeling and sensation leaves a score, it leads to greater bondage. It has to repeat. It leads to greater bondage, which is suffering, which is the deeper meaning of the word klesha, that which leads to suffering, right? Now, once the impression has been left on the consciousness, all those impressions or sanskars, they gather in one place, a resting place, they lie at one place, and that is called the ashay. Later on, Patanjali is going to tell us in a later sutra that there is really no difference between the klesh and the ashay. Klesh no mool, ej karma no ashay. But at present, we have to understand this, that klesh is beyond time. Ashay is that klesh which has created an action in time, and that action has left a reprint, which an imprint or a sanskar which works as a new klesha, and that is lying in ashay. So what is the difference between klesh and ashay? In klesh, there's the beyond time, and in ashay, the thing has been repeated, and the more times it is repeated, the more the potency of the ashay, right? So ashay is the resting place, the storage house of the residue of karma. We'll just take this in a different way and then go ahead. We say that Vishnu, the god Vishnu, is sleeping upon Sheshnag. Sheshnag is also called as Kundalini, right? So what we say is that Vishnu is sleeping upon Sheshnag. Shesh means remainder. Shesh means remainder. Each moment of our life, when the moment passes, it leaves a remainder. It leaves an imprint on the consciousness. This is called a sanskar. That sanskar leads to a tendency for repetition of the same thing. And the more it is repeated, the more potent it becomes, the more we are in bondage. Right? So that sanskar is the klesh. The klesh is outside time, but the ashay, where the sanskars are lying, that has been formed through the what you call movement of the klesh through time. So those kleshas are lying in some eternal time. The what do you call the klesh is beyond time. The ashay is through time, but the ashay is beyond the time of the body. Even if the body dies, the ashay does not die. But the vipak, the fruition, it happens in time. It happens in our normal linear time. And we'll go into this. So in that state of what do you call Purush Vishesh, we have no karma. There is no, and we take the 5 kleshas as avidya, asmita, rag, dvesh, abhinivesh. We'll just go into them. So there is no asmita, so there is no karta bhav. I remember once somebody asked a question that in the Gita, Krishna is talking about killing so many people. And how is that killing so many people is not a sin? Somebody asked me a question. I think some years ago this question was asked. I just remembered it now. So there's the doer inside, the ego inside, the asmita inside. As long as the ego is doing, even if it is love, it is a sin. And when you are doing without ego, without karta bhav, whatever you are doing, even if you're killing somebody, it is not a sin because there is no doer over there. And this is very difficult to understand. And this is only in this Vedantic philosophy have they come to this height where they can make such a statement. No other religion of the world has the guts to make such a statement. Right? So there is no karta bhav, no doer at that state of Purush Vishesha. Now we'll go into the words. The first word he has used is klesha. And there are 5 kleshas. The word klesha comes from the root klish, meaning to cause pain. What have we put here? To distress, yeah, to cause pain. Not just ordinary pain, not just ordinary suffering, but intense suffering, to be the cause of intense suffering. From klish, we get the noun klesha, the word which we use. And this klesha, it gives us the emotion of suffering. The emotion of suffering. Right? Please understand, when Patanjali uses the word, for what he's talking about suffering, it may not appear as suffering to us. If I suddenly come into a lot of money, for me it is not suffering. I've come into a lot of money, right? But Patanjali says, because you are bound by that karma, it is more suffering. It is intense suffering. I hope I'm coming across in this, right? So he is not talking about suffering that, what do you call, my girlfriend left me and ran away and I'm in suffering. No, he's not talking about that. He's talking about even what we call as happiness is also suffering because it binds the soul. So what leads to bondage is suffering. That is what he's talking about. Now, before going into this, we'll try to understand the mechanics of suffering. Who suffers? In real language, who suffers? Why does it suffer? Who gets hurt? Who suffers the pain? You know, in the, what do you call, Mahabharata, it's not in the real Mahabharata, but there are many offshoots of the Mahabharata which tells you stories of the Mahabharata. And one of those offshoots, there is this story of where Bhima, he ate a whole, what do you call, bag full of ladus, and instead of him getting diarrhea, Duryodhana got diarrhea, right? So, who eats the ladu and who gets diarrhea? Who feels the hurt? That is the ego. Who is suffering? The ego never suffers. Please understand, the ego never suffers. The ego only feels the hurt. It passes it on to the soul. The soul suffers. I hope I'm coming across in this, right? So when we must understand the mechanics of suffering, right? You insult me, right? My ego is hurt because you brought down my share price by insulting me, right? But my ego is not willing to suffer. He passes it on. It goes to the soul. The soul is suffering. Now, why is the soul suffering? You see, in Gujarati, we say Jeev bade che. We don't say aham bade che. Okay, I hope you can understand what I'm trying to say. You say my soul is suffering, not the ego is suffering, right? But it is the ego which feels hurt. So somebody commits the blunder and somebody pays. There is only one form of suffering. Only one form of suffering, and that is bondage. Why does the soul suffer? He is saying the insult is the insult because you are bound in self-love, you are bound in the ego, you are bound in this high estimation of yourself. You drop that, there is no suffering, but you are bound. Be free from that. It is suffering to tell you to break free. It is suffering because it wants to move from bondage to freedom. Have I come across in this? I don't know. Have I been able to explain this? So all suffering is of the soul. There is no suffering of the ego. The soul is suffering for only one purpose, that why are you still in bondage? Why are you still suffering? Be free. There is nothing like suffering. And how to be free? Be free of the 5 kleshas. They are the roots of suffering. Patanjali is telling us these are the roots. These 5 roots. See, all karma is born out of these 5 roots. All karma comes out of these 5 roots, right? 5 kleshas. So, supposing we say Jeev bade che, we can say in Hindi, Ram jalta hai, Ravan nahi jalta hai, right? We can say Ravan is not what do you call suffering. Ravan feels the hurt, but it is Ram who is suffering, right? And this we see in the, what do you call, Ramayana. Now, this movement from the klesh to the suffering, which is the feeling of suffering, which is the karma, which was the cause of the klesh, to create the suffering, that movement is called as vipak, right? We are going to go into this later, but this word vipak, pak means fruition, pak means cooking, pach, it comes from pach, pachau, to digest, pachau, to bring to fruition. When the raw fruit comes to, what do you call, it comes to harvest as the, what do you call, fruit, right? So in that there is a process involved. And this process from the klesh to the karma, he doesn't call it as pak. He doesn't call it as pach or pak. He says vipak. Vipak means vishesh, something separate from this process is responsible for this process of cooking, for this process of fruition. Okay, I hope I'm coming across in this. That is, which is not a part of this process. And that is the outside event. That is the outside event which happens. So this V is something separate from the process of fruition, from the process of cooking. But the process of cooking is dependent upon V. Right? It is what you call, because of this something separate. What is that something separate? The outside event. Let's see this in a different way. So for any process of fruition from the klesh to the karma, that movement from the klesh to the karma, there must be some outside event which triggers that process. You know, once, I think must be about 42 years ago, Ramdulare Bapu was explaining to us the Ramayana, and he's telling us that the most important character in the whole Ramayana, whom you have to, what do you call, what's her name? Huh? Kaikai. Is Kaikai. Kaikai. He's saying, you have to understand Kaikai. Ram was about to become king. Now this is a play. Take this as a play. Ram Leela. Right? It's there to give us an understanding of this whole process. Ram was about to become the, what do you call, king. Right? And she then went to Dhritarashtra and asked for her boon and sent him to the forest to Vanvas. Now, here Ramdulare Bapu is telling us that she saw that this young boy was not yet ready to, what do you call, take up the throne. And so he had to pass through a process of suffering. Now the seed of suffering, the root of suffering, called klesha, was already lying in Rama. Kaikai saw this, that unless this root burns, this person is not free. He is not Purush Vishesha Ishvara. Am I coming across in this? So she sent him into the forest. Now for that seed, that klesh, that root which was lying in the chitta, in the unconscious mind, some outside event had to happen for it to reach the state of karma. And that reaching the state of karma is called vipak. That outside event is vishesh, something from outside, not a part of this. You see, and that was the kidnapping of Sita. Can you understand? So we'll say, because Sita was kidnapped, Ravan took away Sita, Ram was in suffering, but the Ram was already in suffering. The seed of suffering was lying in Ram. The event only allowed that seed to come to fruition. Am I now able to come across in this process? Right. So the seed of suffering is lying within us. And it is as we observe the fruition, as we observe the karma, as we observe the repetition of the karma called ashaya, in that whole process of observation, slowly we are free of all these. It is this inner movement where we become free of these. So this vipak needs an outside cause called nimit. And that nimit could be any event in life, right? And in the Ramayana, it was the kidnapping of Sita. Now there are 5 kleshas: avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. Now, we're not going to go into detail in these because later on he's going to talk about the kleshas in later sutras in what do you call detail. Avidya is the first klesha. This is delusion, that is absence of awareness, absence of consciousness plus ignorance. And because there is absence of awareness and ignorance, our perception, our darshan gets clouded, right? The whole Yoga Sutra is nothing but Atha Yoga Darshanam, the process of darshan, right? So because there is avidya, the darshan, the perception is clouded. This avidya gives us a false sense of reality. Ignorance distorts our sense of right and wrong. It creates within the emotional center the duality of liking and disliking, which happens every moment. Now, why was avidya put in at the beginning of creation? In the beginning, there was the formless void, the formless wholeness. In this formless wholeness, there was this desire of the absolute to create form, to create multiple forms. There was that desire of the absolute to create multiple forms. So there, from this formless absolute, there must be a movement from wholeness to particularness or individuality or separateness. In the totality, everything is one, right? But for the game to start, you and I have to be separate. If there is experience of that totality, then again, you and I are one. Then I can't take revenge upon you. How can I take revenge upon myself? Right? But from that wholeness, there has to come separateness. This movement from wholeness to separateness was the creation of avidya. It was due to avidya. Am I coming across in this? So in the very beginning, in the moment of creation, this seed, this klesha of avidya had to be sown in. Otherwise, that totally absolute oneness would not become individual separateness. Now, once the separateness happens, once the separateness is born, there is avidya, ignorance that this was created, but beyond that we were one. We forget that, right? And that is that avidya. I think I am separate from you. So what is born? Asmita. Asmi is I am. Right? So first there was a wholeness, a totality. In that wholeness, separateness was created. So the separateness of different forms was created, and each form took upon itself that I am separate from you. That I am separate from you is Asmita, Asmi, I am. These forms can see each other, they can react with each other, they can interact with each other, they can relate with each other. So the second klesh after avidya is asmita, I amness. The ego is born, the separateness is born. The definition of asmita is yasmach panchatatvani vibheti saha. With this panchatatvani of the five elements, of the five bhutas, the five tattvas, vibheti, to separate, bhed, alag padu, saha. Now, these forms which were created in that formlessness because of avidya, they said, I want to have personal experience. I want to have personal experience. Now try to understand this. In the beginning, there was the formless absolute. In that formless absolute, there was the desire to create form. There was a desire to create form so it could experience, that absolute could experience, the soul could experience, the spirit could experience. So it created forms in the formless. Those forms said, I am, so Asmita, and through that, they said, I want to experience. Now, he is not going to experience, the creator is not going to experience. I want to experience, right? And they, to experience, it is they, this Asmita arouses the five senses in nature, arouses the five elements in nature. It is that Asmita, it is Asmita is that which Pancha Tattvani, it gives rise to the five elements. And it is because of the experience of the five elements that each Asmita can experience life in its own personal way. I don't know. So the second klesha is Asmita, the one who arouses the cause of manifestation of the five tattvas, the five elements. There is no other way the individual I consciousness can experience. That absolute consciousness can experience without the tattvas. The individual consciousness cannot experience without the five tattvas, without the five elements. And it's very important to note over here that in that moment of death, in the moment when we die, there is that moment where the five elements dissolve back into their roots, and we are at that state where the formless created the forms. It happens automatically. We come to that state automatically because of the energy of death itself. Of course, if we are unconscious, we do not have darshan of it, we do not have a perception of it, but it automatically leads us to that state. So the universe or cosmos was created from the desireless energy of desire. Here we understand this. His desire, but his desire was in the formless. There was nothing to desire. It was just the desire to create form. That is why we call it the desireless desire, his desire. But when it comes down to my ego, my asmita, my I amness, then I desire this and I don't desire this. I want this and I don't want this. I like this and I don't like this. Then the next two kleshas are born, rag and dvesh. So that general desire in the formless becomes a particular desire with the I amness, and that particular desire leads to attachment or repulsion, which is rag or dvesh. The pattern of running after pleasure and running away or aversion to pain, rag and dvesh, right? So the personal, it desires more pleasure and it wants to run away from that which brings suffering or pain. And this turns into a natural habitual tendency within us. This is a deeply embedded tendency. Wherever there is pain, we complain. Wherever there is suffer, we don't want it. We want to be free of it. And wherever there is a comfort, wherever there is pleasure, we are running behind it. And we don't realize that both are pain because both lead to bondage. So the original desire in the absolute, which was the desireless desire, at our level of the ego, it becomes rag and dvesh. Right? And that forms that deep pattern of running after pleasure and running away from pain. The final klesh is abhinivesh. Abhinivesh. Now, what is abhinivesh? We have to understand this. Normal translation we can take as fear of death. Fear of death of the physical existence, physical body, right? Uh, a deep attachment to the physical body. That we want to continue our existence in the sensual state, in the physical state, right? And so there's this deep inner doggedness, this deep inner tenacity that I want to continue my physical existence. And I meet people who are more than 90 years old and they still want to live another 10 years, another 20 years, right? And there's this deep tenacity to continue physical existence. In another way, is to cling to life, the clinging to life. And sometimes when a person is dying, we are able to observe this, what do you call, abhinivesh. The soul does not want to easily leave. It wants to cling on to physical existence. And in so many people whom we see who are dying, there is this clinging to this physical. It doesn't want to leave easily, right? And that is abhinivesh. I don't know. Have I come across in this spot? So it is not just rag, dvesh. It is the deeper desire than rag and dvesh to hang on to material existence. Now, where does this doggedness come from? Where does this intensity to live in the physical body come from? And it only comes from deep desire. Now, desires have a multiplicity in the sense that I could have so many desires, right? And each of these desires will also have a potency, means an intensity, right? Say I may desire a new shirt, but okay, if I don't get it, I'm okay with the old shirt. So the desire is there, but it's of a low intensity. Can you get what I'm trying to say? But no, I've seen somebody else wearing this, what do you call, branded shirt, and I've got to have this shirt. Now, it is the same desire, but now it has a deeper intensity. Okay. Now, the more desires I have, coupled with the intensity of each desire, will form a kind of total momentum of desire. And that momentum of desire will make me hang on to physical existence. Or we can say, the more unfulfilled desires I have, the more I want to hang on to my physical body. I hope I'm coming across in this one, right? So the less desires I have, or if I've reached a state of consciousness which is beyond desire, then there is no hanging on to physical existence, because now there is no desire to fulfill anything. So it is not exactly fear of death that is abhinivesh. It is intensity of desire to fulfill itself. For desire to fulfill itself, that is abhinivesh. Right. So this is the fifth klesh. So Patanjali says these 5 kleshas are put into existence at the time of creation. They are beyond time. They are the universal seeds of life. Universal seeds of life. Even if you see an animal dying, right, you will see that abhinivesh, it wants to stick on to physical existence anyhow. So these are the universal seeds of, in animals there is no ego, but there is egoism, right? If another lion comes in another lion's territory, you better not come in my territory, we have to fight. There is egoism, but there is no ego as such. But it is these five kleshas which allow that formlessness, that totalness, the totality to become many forms and give us the whole play of life and all its forms. It is because of these five kleshas. And that is why they are there from the beginning of time. Now, in certain cases, rag or dvesh is overcome by abhinivesh, and sometimes abhinivesh is overcome by rag or dvesh. So, supposing I say I'm madly in love with this girl, right? So that is rag, right? Rag. But I say if I don't get this girl, I'll commit suicide, right? So rag has become more powerful than abhinivesh. Can you understand what I'm trying to say? Right? I'm willing to give up all my desires for this one desire, abhinivesh. So the fear of death does not bother me. I'll commit suicide, right? So in this instance, rag becomes more powerful than abhinivesh. Or I may have a problem in my body where I have to have an operation to cut it off, right? Cut off some part of the body or something, right? And it may involve a lot of pain, may involve a lot of suffering. Now, normal, there is dvesh towards suffering, right? There is aversion of suffering. But here I will willingly experience suffering because I want to live longer, abhinivesh. Can you understand? So when we observe these in our daily life, we come across so many permutations and combinations. So the first word is klesha, then karma. We'll go into karma. The next word is vipak, which comes from the root pach, to cook, pachau, to digest, to lead to fruition. And we have seen that karma leaves a impression on the consciousness, and that impression, what you call, leads to repetition. Okay. Can I take a 1 minute break? Okay, 1 minute break. I'll just take one.
Ji, sir.
My tea is also coming.
Sir, you are on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll try to go into this. The ashay, every thought, every feeling, every sensation leaves an impression upon the consciousness or the soul. So we said if you're giving the soul the impression of itself, the impression of consciousness only, then it does not leave an impression. Can we understand? Now, we'll come to that. Ashay. Klesha karma vipak ashay. Ashayi. A means from all sides. She to rest. So all these, what do you call, impressions are lying at a place in the unconscious mind called the ashay, the resting place, right, of all of them. Now, any klesh once sown in the chitta, any klesh, rag, dvesh, any klesh, it has certain properties. It tries to awaken certain dormant tendencies which are lying in the four centers. It will mainly connect to the negative side of the emotional center. That is, once the klesh is sown in the chitta, it will try to awaken certain thoughts, certain feelings, certain sensations. Those don't come from anywhere. They were already lying in the ashay, but it tries to awaken them. Am I coming across in this? Certain desires, certain wishes, certain trains of imagination, that is daydreaming, brooding. Now, once the klesh comes in, it comes under vipak, the law of cause and effect. That is the path to fruition, the path to completion. So the klesh is the seed. The tendency or the inclination which it awakens in the centers is the process of fruition. And when that tendency or inclination leads to a thought which gives a feeling and suffering or whatever, it becomes the karma. We'll try to see this in a different way. So the manifested thought, feeling, sensation, or desire is the karma. But the process that takes place in the mind from the klesh, that is awakening the tendency, to the final thought or the feeling, that is called vipaka. Vipak, the process of fruition. Now, each klesh will have a certain spectrum, will have a certain, that it can give rise to these kinds of feelings, these kinds of, later on we will see he's talking about jati, ayu, bhoga, but we won't go into that today, right? So it will give, it will awaken inclinations of a certain kind, desires of a certain kind, different strings of daydreaming of a certain kind. Let us take one klesh as a example. Now, today I am not a father, okay? Tomorrow my wife gives birth to a daughter. Right? So today I was a father in theory only, but now I'm practically become a father. My wife has given birth to a daughter. And there is attachment to that daughter. Right? This attachment is rag, one of the kleshas, one of the 5 kleshas. Is this clear to everyone? Now, before this, I was not a father, right? So, certain inclinations were lying within me. They don't come from outside. Please understand, they don't come from outside, but they cannot get activated. They cannot move on the path of fruition. They cannot move on the path of vipak, but they are still lying within me, right? So if somebody comes to me and he says, my daughter every day is coming late, I'm little worried. I'll say, what is there to be worried about? God is there to take care of your daughter. But tomorrow I become a father and I have a daughter. And then my daughter starts coming late. Can you understand the, what do you call? Now, that feeling of worry, that awakening of the feeling of worry, that inclination to worrying, right? It was activated because of the klesha, attachment to daughter. When there was no attachment to daughter, because I did not have a daughter, the inclination was lying there, but it was not activated. I hope I'm coming across it. Yeah, you get what I'm trying to say. But by the very becoming of the father, that attachment to the daughter, the rag, it awakens certain things which are lying in the 4 centers, but they were already lying over there. It gives them a kind of push. Now, Vishesha, Vipak, something from outside. Now the event, my daughter is late in the night. So this is from outside, the V which comes from, and that inclination which was lying there to worry, it becomes a thought or feeling of worrying, and I start worrying, the karma of worrying. I hope I've come across in this. Can you get it? So each klesha, the minute it is formed, it will sort of awaken different possibilities, but those possibilities were already lying there. Where were they lying? In the ashay? Where were they lying? In the ashay? Like, I would not daydream that my daughter is okay and everything is. Supposing my daughter is having a fever, then I would not. I start daydreaming that the daughter will get better and all that. You see, so it is that klesha of attachment which has awakened that string of daydreaming. But if I had no daughter, there would be no daydreaming. But still, it would be lying. The inclination lies within me. So all these inclinations, they lie at one place, and that is the ashay, the resting place. The resting place. Later on, Patanjali is going to klesh no mool. The root of klesh is the ashay, but that is a separate thing. We are going to take in a later sutra later on. At present, yes, they were lying dormant, Hemaji, in the centers. They were lying as inclinations, as tendencies. They were lying in a liquid form, sort of molten form. And it is the molten, it is like I put water, which is the molten form in the, what do you call, freezer, and it becomes a cube of ice, which is the karma. So the tendencies is the molten form, which is lying in the 4 centers, and the final output is worrying, which is the ice cube, right? And I come into that. So the outside event, I will take again klesh as seed, not as root. The outside event, what you call, gave water to the root. The water, the root, what you call, came, the seed formed a sapling, and the sapling gave me the fruit of worrying, right? And worrying will leave another impression upon my consciousness, which goes back into the ashay and acts as a klesh for repetition. Right? We can take another example. The klesh of I amness, asmita. In ordinary language, we'll call it ego, or in Gurdjieffian language, we can call it as self-love. Now, so say it has one tendency, that it does not like anyone laughing at it, like anyone laughing at it. And this awakens suspicion. So if there's a room of 4 or 5 people and what do you call, 2 people in one corner are laughing, then I feel they are laughing at me only. You get it? So this is my ego, my self-love, that they are laughing at me. Right? And in the Mahabharata, we have this beautiful example of Draupadi laughing at Duryodhana when he slipped in the non-existent water, right? And so we take Duryodhana as the epitome of self-love, the epitome of the ego. And you can see the ego was hurt and how there was inner suffering, and the, what do you call, the rag, the dvesh, the, what do you call, it gave rise to this dvesh of taking revenge upon the Pandavas. Can you see? Or we, in normal cases, we can also see another inclination of the self-love is that it wants to, it is never wrong, it always justifies itself, right? So when we observe these things, we observe how the klesh is there, but with the klesh could be rag or dvesh, but it leads to so many different inclinations, so many different possibilities, so many different tendencies, and all those together, they don't come from anywhere outside. They are all already lying there, and they are lying in a resting place in a library called ashay. So all these propensities which are lying in the ashay, the tendencies, right? Each one with repetition increases in potency. They are like political parties. And each political party wants to increase its members, right? So if there's one which is a tendency for reaction, a tendency for irritation, a tendency to get angry, a tendency to snap at somebody, so there is one inclination like that, and I get angry upon you, or I snap at you, or I call you something, then that inclination gets reinforced. It becomes a karma, the karma leaves an impression, the impression goes back into the ashay, and that potency of that inclination increases. Now, all these what do you call, inclinations which are lying in the ashay, all of them together, Gurdjieff calls as man's level of being. What is his level of being? Their tendencies, their propensities. Tavariaji Sahib calls it as man's structure of acceptance. But when he talks about structure of acceptance, he's talking about something little deeper, so we can't go into it today. We can do it at some other time, but it's something worth understanding. So all these propensities, tendencies lying in that library, lying there, all together have a certain, what do you call, structure, a certain spectrum, a certain level of being, which is what I am. I am not my name. I am all that is lying there. Okay. Now, this totality gives a certain momentum to my life. I don't realize it. I don't realize it because I'm not conscious. But it is pushing me in a certain direction all the time. The momentum of my ashay. It is responsible for all the choices I make from morning to evening. I think I have made this choice out of free will. And I don't realize that this unconscious ashay, where all these inclinations have been repeated so many times, have gathered so much of potency, so much of momentum. They are pushing me in a certain direction. They're pushing my choices. They're controlling my life. I don't realize this. So we feel we are making conscious decisions in our life, but actually it is all these which are pushing us in a certain direction. And once we awaken to this and we realize this, we say, how can we rise above this? How can we really make use of free will, which is a gift given to us? Gurdjieff says level of being attracts life. I want to attract more happiness in my life. But unless the inclinations are more towards happiness, I cannot attract happiness. I will only attract more suffering or whatever, anger or irritation, etc., etc. It will lead to events which will increase more irritation. It will lead to events which will increase more anger. So this structure has to change. The whole of sadhana is working with all these inclinations, these which are lying in the ashay. Now, like I said, we took this question in the beginning. We'll repeat the question. What is the difference between klesh and ashay? Klesh is the original seed, the original root. When that root goes through the process of fruition, it becomes a karma. The karma leaves an impression. Those inclinations which went into the fruition come from the ashay, and those inclinations get repeated. The klesh remains the same. These inclinations go through a process of repetition. But according to Patanjali, klesh and ashay are the same thing, right? But still, ashay is something which has been repeated and repeated in time. Even though it is the klesh being repeated, the klesh is free of time. The ashay is in some other time. It accompanies us at death, but still there is a state where we can be free of ashay. Can we be free from klesh completely? We are going to take that in the end. We are going to take that in the end, right? We can be free of ashay, but we have to ask ourselves, can we be free of these 5 kleshas, completely free of them? And we'll go to that. So ashay is klesh through time, klesh which has moved through time. So supposing I'm learning a musical instrument, right? So in the beginning, I make so many mistakes, but as I move time, the sanskar becomes more powerful of learning through practice. The sanskar, and I just touch the instrument to my lips, and it starts playing the music. In the beginning, I was playing noise, right? So what is the difference between klesh? Klesh is the beginning, but what is ashay? It is time tested and delivered is ashay, right? So it is that which has gone through time again and again. Klesh is beyond time. Ashay is in eternal time. That is, when the body dies, the ashay goes to the next body. And vipak, the outside event which leads to the inclination becoming the karma, is in our normal time. It is the events of life which allow the vipak to happen. Klesha karma, vipak ashay, we went through these words. Aparamushta, purusha vishesha Īśvara. Aparamushta. Let us go into this, very interesting. Para, the highest, on the other side. Mrushta, to be smeared. To be smeared. Now, the Egyptian mummies were embalmed. Were embalmed. Embalm means that some embalming was done with a certain process to mummify this thing. So in embalming, it is done in a scientific way. But if I take the substance of embalming and I throw something here and I throw something here, and it doesn't really embalm the body, but it just creates a kind of chaos, then that body is smeared with it. Can you see the difference what I'm trying to say? Smearing is a kind of chaotic, making dirty, whilst embalming is lifting to a different level, right? Now, here we have to go into this. So para means on the other side, highest, mrushta to be smeared, para mrushta to be smeared completely, to be made dirty completely, to be made chaotic completely. And apara mrushta, who is not smeared completely, the one who is not smeared completely. First, he takes you to the extreme, smeared completely, and then he says apara mrushta, not smeared completely. But Purusha Vishesha Ishvara. Now here, why does he use the word aparamushta? It is because this Purush Vishesh, after reaching, where the Ishvara reaches that state, which is equal to the Purush. So he becomes Purush Vishesha. When he reaches that state, he still lives a normal life. He still lives a normal life. The kleshas come in life. The karmas come in life. They touch him. They touch him, but he walks through them. He is not smeared by them. Am I coming across in this? Well, I'll try to give it in another way. That I'm very thirsty. So I need water to drink to quench my thirst. But if you give me 3 drops of water on my tongue, it's not going to quench my thirst. Right? So when we use the word para, we are saying it has to be in so much amount to quench my thirst. That is why Patanjali is using the word para. Okay, that Purush Vishesh Ishwar is moving through normal life. The kleshas will come, the karmas will come, the vipak will come, the ashay will come, everything will come. But it will not be enough to quench his thirst, not enough to smear him. He will walk through them, but not enough to make him dirty. Can you understand what I'm trying to say? He's not totally free of them, but he has come to a state where they cannot make him dirty again. He will not be identified with them again. And that is why he uses the word para. Paramushta. Paramushta. That is some drops of water on the tongue, but they won't quench the thirst. Don't worry. So some, klesh will come, throw a little muck on him. Some karma will come, throw a little muck on him. But that does not, smear him at all. He remains unsmeared by this, untouched by this. And he walks through life. He lives a normal life. Now, in the Shastras, Purush is the enjoyer. Purush creates Prakriti and enjoys Prakriti. Ishvara is the controller, the one who controls. Now, initially, all control was with the physical body, the the temptations of the senses, the hungers of the senses, and the inner bodies would follow the outer body. Slowly, the inner body takes control and it brings Sanyam to the senses and to the outer bodies. In Gurdjieff's language, he says, first the personality is active and the essence is passive. Then the essence, the soul becomes active and the personality is passive, Gurdjieff says. So through hard work, Ishwar, the soul, who at some moment of time lost control of the body-brain system to the five senses and the desires and everything, takes everything back into control. Now this Ishwar does not follow his senses. He does not follow the inclinations of the senses, the desires of the senses, the inner desires of the ego. It does not follow that. It controls. So it becomes Ishvara, and that Ishvara who has reached that state of control, when he is untouched by these five, then he becomes Purusha Vishesha Ishvara. Initially, our psychology follows the desires of the five senses, and then something controls the psychology and the desires. Tavariaji Sahib used to use the words inner man and the outer man. He used to say, first the inner man is identified with the desires and what you call inclinations of the outer man, and then the inner man gains control and the outer man follows the inner man. Right? So it is in this stage where the inner Ishwar, through hard work, through being free of these five or being free of these 8 imperfections of life, he rises above them, comes to a state where he lives life, he is unsmeared by them, he becomes Purush Vishesha Ishvara. Now, let us just go into the definition of the word Purush. Puri dehe shete. Puri jeva dehema sutelo. Right? Now, Puri, Pur, city. Pur also means to fill something. So, city in the sense where empty space has been filled with buildings, etc., etc. Such a deha. Deha means that which has been embalmed. Lepaelu, embalmed. Right? In such a day, the one who is sleeping, the one who is sleeping. That something which is sleeping is not a part of this deha. It is not a part of this. Even though the whole thing is called Purush, that one who is sleeping is not a part of this. He is the supreme consciousness. He is the source of this. He gives birth to everything. He's sleeping there. Ishvara is the soul, and through hard work, he has brought itself on equal balance with the one who is sleeping inside, enjoying inside, the Purush who is enjoying the Prakriti inside. And when he comes to that, he becomes Purusha Vishesha Ishvara. Now he is both the enjoyer also, and he is the ruler of all this. This whole process starts with the holding of presence through self-remembering, through holding your presence, giving the consciousness the impression of itself each moment. So the consciousness, when it gets its own impression, cannot be smeared by the impressions which come from outside, the klesha, karma, vipakashay. And at one point, all the old impressions go away and the consciousness is totally free. That is that Purush Vishesha Ishvara. And it is that state which through hard work and sadhana, we can all of us reach. I'm going to stop here. If there are any questions, I'll take those questions. I hope I've come across. It's a very difficult sutra, but I do hope I've been able to, what do you call, explain it. Right?
I speak, sir.
Namaste, namaste.
Namaste, sir. I used to think that...
Yeah, one minute. Yeah, please.
I used to think that scriptures provide knowledge and wisdom. But today, some of the point that you said regarding suffering, the ego is hurt, but the soul suffers. It has actually brought a lot of solace and comfort to me.
Right. It suffers because it wants to be free of bondage.
Yes.
It wants to break the chains. That's why it
Yes.
suffers.
Yes.
I mean, it says, why are you suffering?
Hmm. This is a tough sutra. It is
Yeah, it
there.
is.
So mm, I think we listen to it again and again to get familiar with some of the ideas.
Right.
That Ashya is something I have still not. What is Ashya?
Klesha karma, vipaka
Klesha karmas,
ashay.
yes. Yes.
Right? Ashay. A means from
Mm.
all sides. She means to rest. That is
Okay.
which is resting from all sides. Right?
Okay.
Now the klesh comes in, and the ashay is all the inclinations of my thoughts,
Mm.
of my feelings and my sensations.
Mm.
Now, klesh is only 5. Actually, if you take out avidya, only 4.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
So the klesh could be anything, rag, dvesh, or anything. So I said the one klesh is rag, my attachment to my daughter.
Yes. Yes.
That attachment to daughter from the ashay, which is my unconscious mind,
Mm.
in that ashay, so many different inclinations are lying. So I said it will awaken one inclination to worry.
Mm.
Can you get it? Yesterday, I
Yes.
did not
Yes.
have a daughter, so there was no inclination to worry.
Yes.
I'll say
Yes.
I don't worry at all. That is not true.
Yes.
The inclination to worry was already lying within me.
And
The
then,
outside event of having a daughter awakened that inclination, which was dormant. So where all these inclinations are lying dormant is the ashay.
and they finally lead to the or samskaras, vasanas.
Those ashays come to the karma, where I suffer the happiness or the sadness of the, what do you call,
Mm.
the thing,
Mm.
which according to the klesh, everything is suffering, because even the happiness binds me more than the sadness, whatever. Right?
And
So
this creates the patterns which we carry to the next
that
birth.
pattern leaves a scar on the consciousness.
Mm.
And that scar becomes it reinforces the inclination, it goes back to the ashay. It goes to the ashay. It's like a feedback process.
Yes. But that being conscious, that self-remembering, that's a wonderful takeaway from today's session.
Yes. So when you're giving your consciousness the impression of its own consciousness, it will not take the impression of suffering. And when it does not take the impression of suffering, there is no ashay.
Yes.
The inclination has not been repeated. You're free of that inclination.
Yes. This sutra has a problem and the solution in it.
Thank you.
Beautiful session, sir. Beautiful session. Very profound, and it has actually brought a lot of comfort.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Please go
Namaskar.
ahead, Samarji. Yeah, good evening, Rajan sir.
Good evening to you.
Sir, today you took us to at least I was in a different world altogether. I'm still not back to my senses. It was such a powerful talk. I'm really, really grateful to you. I want to ask one thing from the last lecture. I couldn't grasp spiritual ego last time properly. So can you please explain that?
Okay, what I meant to say in the last talk was that supposing you want to walk on the path of spirituality, right? And the path of spirituality means dissolution of the ego. But who is going to take the decision that the ego wants to dissolve? So the ego itself has to at some time come to a decision by karta main thak gaya hu. Now I want to dissolve. I want to dissolve in the absolute. So the ego has what is called ichha mrityu, right? So the ego decides that I'm going to walk the path of spirituality, right? And it says it knows that in walking this path is its own death, but it takes that decision. Only then can we walk on the path of spirituality. Now, once we walk on the path of spirituality, a new ego is created, the ego of spirituality, right? It is not a life ego. It does not tell me how to earn so much money tomorrow. It is an ego of spirituality. Supposing I'm doing some exercises in self-observation, then it will decide what time of the day I should do it, how I should do it, in what circumstances I should do it. Or if I want to follow somebody else's practices, some teacher or somebody, it will tell me that this teacher is the right person to follow you for. It is a new spiritual ego. Am I coming across?
Yeah.
So when we walk on the path, we create a new spiritual ego. And that ego follows us for a long part of the journey. Then a part comes when the guidance comes from beyond that ego, and that ego has to dissolve. But till then, that ego is necessary.
Right. So thank you so much.
Sir, there is a question in the chat box. How to leave the chain of repetitions? And I will add my question also. You said you will talk about how to get rid of kaleshas. I will talk towards the end. So does it mean self-remembering or the presence?
No, when we are observing the working of the kleshas, the karma, the vipak and the ashay, when we are observing their working, slowly a separation is created through observation. Through self-remembering, we don't allow them to repeat the pattern. And when both of these are done together, we come to a state where now they cannot affect us. Can you just show me the question again? Sorry, if you don't mind. Right. So we don't want to leave the repetition. Somebody has asked a question, how to leave the repetitions? We want to observe the repetitions. And through the process of observation, we separate from the repetitions. The repetitions lose their intensity, they lose their momentum. And a point comes when they don't repeat any longer. We are free from them. So we don't want to leave the repetitions. It is a process of self-observation and self-remembering, which takes us there. Yeah. Any other question? No.
Any other question?
I know today was a little difficult. But
yes, sir. We have to, I think, go again to listen to this. Yes. Sir, I have a question. This is regarding the refining exercises, regarding the fourth one, statico, when we breathe 5 times and we exhale the 6th time. Sometimes I get hiccups during that. What to do and why it is happening? Sometimes, initially it was all the time, most of the time, it reduced the intensity, it became 0. But sometimes I do get it.
You have Vicks Vaporub at home?
Yes.
So just take a drop. It's poison. Huh? Just take a small and touch it to the tongue.
Okay.
And then do the exercise.
Okay. So before the starting of the refining.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're just activating the nadi, which creates the hiccups, right? And we don't want to activate that nadi.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. Any more questions? Rishabh, can you see from YouTube, are there any questions?
Hello.
Yes,
Hi.
please.
Yes,
please.
Yes, I am. Well, good morning and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am at the other part of the world. And my question, I'm sorry to repeat the question because I think you answered 3 times and I'm still not getting it. How can we leave the chain of repetition?
Right. Okay. So here we commit an action, right? What you don't understand, ask me in between. We commit an action, which is called karma, right? That action leaves a pattern on the consciousness. The consciousness is the background for everything. So even after the action is over, that pattern is lying on the consciousness, right? That pattern has a tendency to repeat. Can you get it? It is an inclination to repeat. Now, in the ashay, there are so many patterns for increase. Now, one more. So the intensity of repetition becomes more. Right? Now, when I am what do you call, remembering myself, or I'm holding presence in my body, right? Then I'm trying to, presence means consciousness. I'm giving the consciousness a pattern of its own pattern, right? So then if I'm at the moment of, if I'm self-conscious, if I'm giving the consciousness its own pattern, and I'm committing the karma at that time, it does not become karma, it becomes kriya, because it does not leave a score. Because at the moment of leaving the score, I'm giving its own score. I'm not allowing that score to come. Right? So this process is called as self-remembering. Right? So when I remember my consciousness, I'm giving my pattern its own, my own consciousness its own pattern, instead of the pattern of the karma. I perform the karma, but the karma does not bind me into any kind of bondage. It is not possible, because only if the score remains can it take me into bondage. If there is no score, it cannot take me into bondage. If no pattern is created, it can. So actually there is no karma, it is called kriya. It is called kriya.
Oh, okay.
Just
Thank you very much.
action without this. I don't know if I come across it. So
So
now
my
I'm
main-
free of the pattern of repetition. But
Yeah.
then
So
again, you see, this is an ongoing process. I may forget sometime. Then again, I come into the pattern of repetition. Again, I remember and try to be conscious. And this goes on till a moment. Then I can elongate that period of being conscious longer and longer. And slowly I'm free of the pattern of repetition.
it's remembering that I am the consciousness.
I'm conscious.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, Anju, go ahead.
Right. One lady. She has to.
Sir, asa is something which we carry from our past life.
Very true. I didn't go into that. But these inclinations, when we carry from our past life, they again are in liquid form. So when the child is born, the inclinations are there, but in liquid form. They're not inclinations. But then the father and mother give outside events. The education gives outside events. And from them, certain inclinations are become ice cubes. The rest lie dormant. They don't run away,
Yes.
but they're lying dormant over there.
Yes.
Can you? And
Yes.
even before the child is born, because the child has to come through mother and father. And the mother and father both have different DNA. So that DNA, you know what chai ki garni hoti hai, where you sieve the sieve. The DNA acts as a sieve. So certain inclinations will be made more intense and certain inclinations will be subdued. Can you see? If that soul has an inclination towards anger and reacting, but the father is a very calm person, never reacts, then that may be subdued a little when it passes through the DNA. You get it?
Yes.
Right? But again, somebody who doesn't have a very intense pattern to react, right? He comes, but it's still in liquid form. But I keep taunting that child all the time. Then he may develop a pattern to react. Can you get what? So it is the outside factor which brings about the fruition, which brings about the vipak. Can you get it? It is dependent on that outside factor.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions?
Okay. So we'll stop
Yes,
here.
sir. Ji, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Shall
you.
just, will you close or?
Okay, sir. I'll do it.
Please close. Yeah.
Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti. Shanti.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We meet next Tuesday. Thank you, sir.